The children who challenged me the most as a teacher are also the children that taught me the most about behavior. I'm Amy, a former special educator turned homeschool mom, and I help homeschool parents of kids with big behaviors understand what's really driving those behaviors so they can create calmer days and more cooperation at home. After teaching first grade for 5 years, I moved into special education, where I spent the next 6 years teaching mixed K-5 classroom of children with autism, ADHD, cognitive disabilities, learning differences, and some really significant behavior needs. And those classrooms made it impossible for me to keep looking at behavior the way I had earlier in my career. Because I was working with children who could tell me a rule and still couldn't follow it in a hard moment, and children who could do something successfully one day and seem completely unable to access the same skill the next day. Children whose capacity changed depending on how overwhelmed they were, how much language they were processing, what was happening in the environment, whether they were regulated, how difficult the task felt to them, or whatever had happened 10 minutes earlier. And if I looked at all that through the lens of they know better, so there needs to be a consequence, I would miss so much information. So I realized that behavior wasn't giving me a verdict about the child, it was just giving me data. So instead of asking, how do I get this child to stop, I became much more interested in what is making this so hard right now. And that question changed everything. Because sometimes the child needed a clearer boundary. Sometimes they needed a skill explicitly taught. Sometimes the environment needed to change or the task itself needed to be broken down. And oftentimes they needed to regulate before they could access the learning. But there were also times that I had to recognize that the strategy I was using was contributing to the problem. I've totally been there. There were times when a child wasn't doing what I wanted, so I increased the pressure. I repeated myself more firmly. I threatened a consequence. I made it increasingly uncomfortable for them not to comply. And sometimes it worked, at least from the outside. The child got quiet, they stopped arguing, and they did what I asked. And at the time, I saw that as evidence that the strategy worked. What I didn't understand in my 20s was that I could suppress the outward behavior without actually helping the child regulate. Increasing pressure and threat activate a child's stress response even further. And a child becoming quiet or compliant doesn't tell us what's really happening inside their nervous system. I would look at the compliance and think, okay, that worked. But getting a child to comply doesn't mean they're regulated, connected to you, or learning what we hope they'll learn from the situation. I also had to confront how much of my classroom revolved around my agenda. I had a plan. I knew what needed to get done. I knew how I wanted it to get done.